Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, or Tiger Tank 12, however you wanna call me, I don't really care. And today we are back on our test server looking at the Amx 65t, the brand new upcoming tier 8 French heavy tank. Well, it was a long sentence. So, wow, look at this tank. It looks super weird. Disclaimer, first and foremost, we're only taking a look at the vehicle once it's fully upgraded, and today we're going to be, as always, as the other vehicles, we're going to be checking the different gun setups that this tank comes with. So it is a tier 8, and the very first thing you will notice is if you look at the hull, it does seem awfully familiar, because if you look at the Amx 5120 and the Amx 65t, those hulls are identical. Not just identical in looks, but also in the statistics and characteristics. Now, 1,550 hit points with the upgraded turret, 100 millimeters of frontal armor, 80 on the side, 60 on the rear. It's exactly the same hull armor as the Amx 5120. But this is where the differences actually show up. The turret, let's take a look at the turret. 250 millimeters on the front. Now, that seems like a lot. It is fairly well armored, but it does sport this huge cupola on top, which is an obvious weak spot. And since the turret is quite flat, actually, if you're a little bit on top, you will be able to penetrate without a problem. And tanks with over 250 millimeters of penetration will be able to go through your front armor of your turret. 80 millimeters on the side and 60 on the rear. So it does seem to be sporting a fairly decent turret with a big weak spot, which might just terminate the entire pro turret thing, but we'll see that later on in the gameplay. Firepower wise, this tank, like any of the other French heavies that are coming into the game, does sport two different guns. Now the first gun that we'll take a look at is the 120mm gun, which is unique to this vehicle. It's the gun that I've equipped right now, and this gun, like the Amx M4, the 127mm gun, or the 120, does have the same role. Like the 120mm gun is for close quarter engagements. 4.35 rounds per minute. Well, that's not too rosy. 218 millimeters of penetration with 120mm gun, not too rosy either. 325 with premium rounds. Now that does sound like this tank is going to heavily be based on premium shells to go through tier 10 opponents or tier 9 vehicles. Then you have 400 average damage, well, standard for 120mm gun, a dispersion of 0.36, which is not too good, and an aim time of 2.7, which is actually not that bad regarding a tier 9 gun on a tier 8 heavy tank. What do we have on the other side with the 100mm gun? Well, it is pretty much only gun that goes for this vehicle and the Amx 31 prototype. It does sport autocannon equivalent on other French tanks like the Batchat 25T or the Batchat 25T AP, like the former what was it called? The Lorraine actually has the same gun as this gun right here. So 6.45 rounds per minute, much better DPM, 232 millimeters of penetration with standard rounds, and 263, so not a huge jump from standard to premium rounds. 300 average damage, a dispersion of 0.34, better than the 0.36, and an aim time of 3 seconds, which is very surprising since the aim time is worse than on the 120mm gun. Today we're first going to be sporting the 120mm gun, and then we will actually go over to the 100mm gun, so you can see actually both guns in action. So gun depression on this vehicle, 8 degrees, gun elevation 13 degrees, not too good, and gun turret reverse speed with 27.98 degrees per second. Let's go over to mobility since we have already covered survivability. 1,100 horsepower engine, which allows you to go 40 kilometers forward and 15 kilometers backwards. Now keep in mind, this is a heavy tank. 40 kilometers forward does not sound bad. It does sound like a decent speed, but you will only be able to reach the 40 kilometer mark when you're going downhill. It's almost impossible to reach 40 kilometers on a on a straight road. Now, keep in mind that the acceleration is not the best, so this tank does need some time to get up to the speed. Then 26.9 degrees per second track traverse, which is decent in my opinion. You can still work around with 26.9 degrees per second. Could be better, but could be worse as well. Concealment is not going to be that great since it's a big tank. It's just as big as the Amx 120, even I think a little bit larger from the profile. It's a big tank, hard to actually hide it very well. 381 meters of view range with obviously good equipment on, so yeah, you can push it up with binos and other stuff with a better trained crew, but that's not really that important right now. So let's jump into a game with the 120mm gun and see how well it will fare. The very first gun we are going to be testing is going to be the 100mm main armament. This is the tier 8 gun, not the tier 9 120mm gun. And this one sports the 232mm of pen. Also, it has a better rate of fire, but it has worse aim time and less average damage, with only 300 damage per shot. Now, averaging that 300 damage per shot is actually quite difficult as well, since most of the shots either go below or some of them might get you above 300. I've had a match where I did about 400 damage with the 100mm gun, which is quite rare, but does happen from time to time. And its main strong points are its accuracy on long range and its fast rate of fire with an additional good pen value. So if we can just get like one of those tanks going up on that ridge line, we can actually quite easily penetrate them. But hitting them is another thing altogether. So the armor on this vehicle, as I had to find out, is for a French heavy tank very, very good. Like, if you compare them to other French heavy tanks as the Amx 50B or the 5120, those tanks obviously lack the armor that this tank actually has. But if you compare it to other heavy tanks from other branches, let's say the German heavy tanks, the VK101, okay, obviously that is an unfair comparison since that tank is supposed to be the predecessor to the mouse. It's not a very fair comparison in that case. But I would say this is like maybe a bit better armored T-34. Like, the hull armor is not very good. It is the Amx 5120 hull. And the turret armor, well, it does sport some pretty crazy weak spots on top. The hull, obviously, I mean, is going to get penned by any tier 7 tank if they know where to shoot at. It shouldn't be too difficult. But the turret is an entire different story. With 250mm up front, getting through that turret might be quite difficult for tier 8 and tier 9 opponents sometimes even. But what you can see right here is that we can easily take care of the hull of this opposing Amx 65t. Now we're in a kind of a bad spot. They destroyed our cannon. Actually, we just destroyed his tracks once again. Might be one of those bad things when you're aiming at the side armor. Like, it is the pike design. But if you aim at the pike, since the tracks are such a large part of the tank, you might get some extra protection, which might not be the case with the Amx 5120, since we usually do not shoot the tracks on that vehicle, since we usually shoot the turret. But you can see the turret holds up quite fine. that is exactly what you want to do in this vehicle, to go hull down. Hull down, but once they learn a little bit of your vehicle, they will penetrate the tank with ease. But we penetrate the turret, I think the hull right there, but you can see they are bouncing off their turret, but they do manage to get a hit into the cupola. That is the main weak spot. I think it doesn't take them long to figure out that the cupola is a weak spot. Like any other wall of tanks vehicle, the cupola is not as strong as the other part of the turret, and that is the main weakness that you have in this tank. So if you even manage, if you manage to get into a hull down position, they can still take you on, since they can hit your cupola without a problem. And you can see right there, Amx 1375 managed to penetrate us, our hull, quite a few times, and he actually even managed to ammo rack us, or destroy our ammo rack. But you can see 2000 damage bounce, most of it on our turret. I think some of them actually did bounce on the hull as well. 100mm is not bad if you're going up against tier 8 and tier 7 opponents, but you know, it's not the same as 250mm on the turret. And this gun might take quite a while to aim in, but once you get that perfect reticle, those shots will actually penetrate. 232mm of pen, very, very nice. So, you guys just saw the 100mm gameplay. Let's jump right into the 120mm gameplay and see how this tank does fare in close range engagements. So once again, a fairly nice setup. Some tier 9s, most of them tier 8s in this game, no tier 10s. This is exactly what you want to face in this vehicle. You do not want to face tier 10 tanks, because the 250mm on the front of your turret might be strong enough against tier 8 and tier 9 opponents, but once you get into that tier 10 realm, it might get pretty ugly very, very quickly, especially since the aim time and all that stuff is just that much better at tier 10. They will be very reliably able to penetrate your cupola on top, your front armor. I've been penned by several tier 10 tanks on the front of my tank, just because 250mm at this angle is not too crazy against those tier 10 vehicles. And this guy is fairly annoying with his conway. He's always shooting right next to you. So yeah, it's the test server. Idiots are always around on the test server, and they're quite annoying. And this guy is like testing out the splash of the one gun that was added in the last patch for the conway. I'm not even sure what kind of gun it is, but it's like one of those hash guns, very, very trollish at tier 9. I think that is one of the reasons why the conway has been increasingly popular in the last few weeks. I do not like these kind of hash-based tanks, to be honest, but I myself am trying to get the Death Star before it will be replaced by the Badger, and I'm actually very close to unlocking it. Oh god. And right now this is going to be a test for our armor, since we are very aggressively pushing this side. And you can see once you get them, you give them your side or your rear, they will not have an issue to go through, not have a problem to go through your side armor. But let's see if we can get a little bit of close range engagement with the 120mm gun. And there we go, 405 damage. That was just a little bit above the standard roll of 400 damage, but it's very, very it's a very, very nice feeling to be able to do that damage at this tier. And yeah, Aim time wise, what is very interesting about this tank is that the 120mm gun actually aims quicker than the 100mm gun, but at the same time its accuracy is worse, but its alpha damage is better, and also the pen with 218mm is not as good as 232, and even against this Type 4 heavy tank, we will be a little bit in a tough spot to actually be able to go through that vehicle. But let's just hit that RHM, that Waffenträger, because it's an easy vehicle for us to pen and easy damage. So luckily up until this point we didn't really have to test out our armor against these tanks, or we didn't even really get the chance because we only showed them the side of our vehicle. But let's see. We actually managed to penetrate that Type 4, but we take a very, very heavy hit. As you can see right there, he did 500 damage with that high explosive gun. I think that is one of the things people really dislike about the Japanese heavy tanks, just that crazy alpha damage that they have with those high explosive based guns. But well, Wargaming meant that they should have something special for that line, but I think they overdid it. So I have to be careful. I do not want to get another shot of that Type 4 into my tank. As you can see, even against the heavily armored vehicle, as the ST1, that vehicle is able to do 500 damage, and I think that's just not very, very good. But you can see against the Jagdtiger, our third armor does not hold up. Maybe I think he hit our third armor. The big weak spot on top is easily penetrable, and he finished us off quite easily, but that was no problem because we still managed to actually win this game, and we managed to push him back around this corner. That's exactly what I wanted to test. I wanted to test the aggressiveness of this tank with the 120mm gun, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised that the 218mm at this tier and tier 9 is not like something that is going to be completely underwhelming. It actually managed to penetrate the Type 4, but if you really want to be competitive with this kind of gun, you will need to fire APCR, because you will be facing tier 10 vehicles. And yeah, pretty much that leaves us already to the final verdict to this preview of this vehicle. I think I can give a verdict to all 3 of the new heavy tanks in the game, because I haven't done that yet. So, what should I say? Well, first of all, for all the 3 heavy tanks that the French are getting in the next patch, I do enjoy the different gameplay that you get with the different guns. It kind of changes the fact from an aggressive kind of style of game to maybe a more second line style of game where you snipe. I do enjoy that dynamic that you can switch and that you can choose like what really fits your gameplay more. But at the same time, I'm not really too excited about these 3 tanks because they all seem a little bit too similar to me. At least the Amx 65t is different from the Amx M445, the tier 7 version that you can play right now in World of Tanks. And the tier 9 is very different from the tier 8. Like, they still play the same. I mean, the turret is very strong. This turret is 10 times stronger than this turret, but still at the same time they rely on a strong turret, and the hull is not the strongest part of the vehicle. But other than that, like, once you get over here to the Amx M4 MLE 54, the tanks are almost identical. Just a little bit of, stats are different, maybe different guns. But other than that, the tanks are identical, and I'm not a big fan of this, identical tier 10 vehicle, because I do enjoy my different tanks. I do enjoy when I get a tier 9 and a tier 10 that they are completely different. I do not understand why Wargaming does not like this concept. But it's Wargaming's game. They develop it. They think they do what is best for their game, and I'm not sure how do you guys stand to that. So for this preview of the Amx 65t, how I enjoyed this tank. Well, I think it's a little bit too slow. Maybe you can work around this if you get a better skilled crew, but 40 kilometers, I never reached that 40 kilometer mark. But at the same time, I mean, if you're used to playing heavy tanks that have some armor at least, like a Tiger 2, it's quite easy to penetrate as well. But I mean, at least a tank has some armor. And you get to the French heavy tank line right now, to the Amx 5120 or the Amx 5100, you are completely overwhelmed with the lack of armor on these tanks. And I think that is exactly the type of players that this tank line will fit to. If you want to have some armor at least, and then good armor eventually with the tier 10 and tier 9 vehicle, this is exactly what you get with these three tanks. But I do not really enjoy this kind of gameplay that I've seen so many times on other vehicles. That is the exact reason why I enjoyed the Amx 5120 and the Amx 50B, because these tanks played so differently from other tier 9 and tier 10 heavy tanks. They didn't rely on armor, they relied on mobility, and they relied on firepower. That made these tanks so special. Of course, it was very difficult in certain situations where maybe when you were reloading, you had like a pretty tough time. But with these tanks, it's just like, it doesn't have this wow factor that I do enjoy with the Amx 5120 and the Amx 50B. So does that mean this tank is bad? No, it's not a bad tank. At its tier, it definitely can compete, but it can't really decide to have, like, it's one of those things, typical French things. It can't decide if it wants to have great armor and good mobility, or if it wants to have like decent mobility and decent armor, like being bad or kind of mediocre at both of them. And then you have those two guns. Both guns are not, like, I mean, if I would have to choose, I think I would run around with the 100mm gun because I just want that reliable penetration against those tier 10 tanks. But at the same time, it does not have the best aim time. Like, the aim time of the 120mm gun is better, but the penetration of this gun is worse. So if I want to go up against tier 10s, I will have to fire APCR rounds or premium rounds with 325mm of pen. And that just kind of shows me that they can't really decide what they want with this tank or with the entire line. I personally enjoyed the Amx M4 MLE 54. Maybe I'll even grind it, but like eventually way back down the line when I have some time. But the Amx 65t, well, I don't think this is a tank that I particularly will like to play on my live server a lot, because it just is, it's mediocre. Nothing good, nothing bad. It's just there. Like, when you go up against it, people will learn quite quickly that the hull is easily penetrable, and that the weak spot on top is very prominent, making the additional armor on the turret kind of pointless. And then the gun is just, well, they can't really decide which gun is the best. Both guns are kind of awkward in certain situations, so you have to either go over to gold rounds or trade in that aim time for a better pen if you do not want to go for that option of spending more credits. And then it's not fast enough, but it's not well armored enough, to get through the bells. So it's kind of meh. It's not the great best tank. Did I enjoy playing it? That is a good question. Kind of, partly. In some situations, I played this tank a few times. There were games where this tank was great. It was a lot of fun to play. But if you don't get into one of those scenarios where you can really work with the strengths of this tank, strengths being the strong turret armor and maybe enough pen to go up against tier 7 and tier 8 vehicles with the 120mm gun, with the additional alpha damage, I don't really think that this tank was a lot of fun to be played. Maybe it's just because I've played so many vehicles that it's almost a chore to play new vehicles. That could be just my problem. I'd like to know what you guys think of this tank. Have you played it? Do you enjoy it? Why did you enjoy it? Do you think I'm totally wrong on this one? Should I maybe give it a better chance? And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.